Today, we are diving deep into a book that has been stirring up controversy for decades. G. Edward Griffin's The Creature from Jekyll Island. What we're going to do here is break down the author's really influential and, pretty controversial thesis on how the Federal Reserve came to be and what it does. Now, just to be clear, we're not here to say if he's right or wrong. Our job is just to lay out the arguments the book itself makes, plain and simple.
So the book kicks off with this really provocative riddle. Griffin basically looks at the name, the Federal Reserve System, and says, hold on a second. He argues that every single one of those words is designed to mislead you. It's not federal, it has no reserves, and the banks, well, they aren't what you think of as banks. This idea, this riddle, is the starting point for his entire investigation.
And to unpack that investigation, we're going to follow the author's roadmap. First, we'll tackle that riddle. Then we're taking a trip to a very exclusive, very secret meeting on Jekyll Island. After that, we'll look under the hood of what he calls the money creation machine, see how the great bailout game is played, and explore the book's claims about a new world order. And finally, we'll see exactly what he identifies as the creature.
All right, let's jump right into it. First up, the riddle of the Fed. This is really the foundation for everything else the book is going to argue.
And here it is, the core premise of the whole book, laid out plain and simple. Griffin's central argument is that the Fed isn't some benevolent government agency. No, he claims it's a cartel. You know, a group of powerful private businesses, in this case banks, that secretly team up to kill competition and control the market for their own benefit, not yours.
Okay, so if the Fed is a cartel, you got to ask, where did it come from? How was it formed? Well, that brings us to the narrative heart of the book, a super secret trip to a place called Jekyll Island, which Griffin claims is where this whole thing was cooked up.
I mean, just look at the details Griffin lays out here. This is straight out of a spy novel. You have these powerful men sneaking off one by one to a private train car. They're told to use only their first names. Total secrecy. They travel 1,000 miles to this remote, exclusive island club for one reason and one reason only: to write a new banking law that would completely change America's financial system.
So who were these guys using only their first names? Well, according to the book, it was a who's who of American finance. You've got Senator Aldrich, who is tied to J.P. Morgan. You got senior partners from Morgan Banks, the head of Rockefeller's biggest bank, and a guy from a firm connected to the powerful Rothschilds in Europe. Griffin makes the incredible claim that this small group of men controlled about a quarter of the entire world's wealth at that time. Think about that for a second.
But why? What was their motivation? According to the book, it wasn't about patriotism. It was about self-preservation. They wanted to crush the competition they were getting from smaller, scrappier banks. And, maybe most importantly, they wanted to create a system where, if their risky bets went bad, the losses wouldn't come out of their pockets. They'd be shifted onto the American taxpayer.
So, how do you create a system like that? Well, that leads us to our next piece of the puzzle, the money creation machine. This is Griffin's breakdown of the actual mechanics of the Fed, a process he nicknames the Mandrake mechanism, after an old comic strip magician who could create things out of thin air.
Okay, so according to the book, here's how the magic trick works. Step 1, the government needs cash, so it creates debt by issuing bonds. Step 2, the Fed buys these bonds, but not with existing money. It just creates the money out of nothing, crediting the government's account. Poof. This new money is called reserves. And step 3, here's the multiplier. The commercial banks can take those new reserves and lend out up to 9 times that amount, creating even more money in the system.
And here's where it gets really wild. You add the initial money from the Fed to the new money created by the banks, and the book claims you can inflate the money supply by up to 10 times the original government debt. Griffin argues that this is the engine of inflation. He calls it the ultimate hidden tax because it just silently devalues the dollars you've worked hard to save. Now, this whole system hinges on something called fiat money. What is that? Simply put, it's money that isn't backed by anything physical, like gold or silver. It only has value because the government says it does. And according to Griffin, you don't have a choice but to accept it because the government demands you pay your taxes with it, which creates a permanent, built-in demand.
Okay, so you've built this incredible money-making machine. But what's the point? Why go to all this trouble? Well, according to the book, the answer is simple. And it's not pretty. It's what he calls the great bailout game.
The book's answer is blunt. The name of the game is bailout. The whole point of the system is to ensure that when big banks make bad bets and face huge losses, they don't fail. Instead, the system allows them to shift those losses onto the backs of the taxpayers. It's a classic case of privatizing the profits and socializing the losses.
To back this up, Griffin points to a few case studies. First, the defense contractor Lockheed in 1970. He was about to go bankrupt, which meant the big banks that had loaned it $400 million were about to lose a ton of money. So the government stepped in with a loan guarantee, putting taxpayers on the hook to make sure those banks didn't lose their shirts.
Then there's the New York City crisis in '75. The city was about to default on its bonds, which, surprise, surprise, were held by the big banks. So the Treasury swooped in with billions of loans. Griffin argues this wasn't really about saving the city. It was about making sure the banks got their interest payments no matter what.
But the big one, the real poster child for this argument in the book, is the savings and loan crisis of the 80s. When the insurance funds that were supposed to protect depositors went broke, what was the backstop? Well, it was the full faith and credit of the federal government, which Griffin says is just a fancy way of saying you, the taxpayer.
So we've gone from secret meetings to national bailouts. But Griffin argues the ambition was always much, much bigger than just one country. This brings us to what he calls the endgame scenario, building a new world order.
And this is where the book's thesis goes global and gets pretty dramatic. Griffin claims the ultimate goal was never just to control the U.S. economy. It was to create a worldwide system of financial control run by private interests, powerful enough to dominate the politics and economy of every nation on Earth.
So how do you pull that off? What are the tools for building this global financial empire? Well, the book points to these major international institutions: the IMF, the World Bank, and the Bank for International Settlements. Griffin argues these are used to create debt and dependency around the globe. And the final piece of the puzzle, he claims, is a future world central bank with a single global currency.
Now you might think this sounds like a pretty wild theory, but Griffin brings in quotes to back it up, like this one from President Ronald Reagan in 1983. He presents this as proof that the idea of a world currency isn't some fringe conspiracy, but something that's been openly discussed at the very highest levels of power.
All right, we've covered the secret meeting, the money machine, the bailouts, and the global plan. Now it's time to pull it all together and finally put a name to the creature. So at the end of the day, Griffin's case against the Fed comes down to these 7 main charges. He says it's a cartel, it's an instrument of usury, and it creates inflation, our most unfair tax. But he goes further, arguing it fuels war, causes economic boom and bust cycles, and is a tool for totalitarian control. And finally, the ultimate irony, he claims it can't even achieve its own stated goals.
And really, that's the question the book leaves you with. Is the Federal Reserve what we're told it is, an independent guardian of the economy working to keep things stable, or is it something else entirely, the creature G. Edward Griffin describes, born out of a secret meeting on a private island? The book has made its case, and we'll leave it to you to decide.
I think I get it.